air to breathe. And because we're doing this via Zoom, there's some things that I get to read in the course of doing this meeting. So I'm going to start off with, due to the shelter in place in COVID-19, the Technical Coordinating Committee has chosen Zoom as its meeting platform. During the meeting, please mute your mic. If you have not already done so, please mute your mic now. Christina, please take our roll call now.
Okay, bear with me just 1 second. All right, committee members, Anderson. Bellinger. I could have swore I let Bellinger in. Bobadilla.
Here.
Chen.
Here.
Cunningham.
Here.
Roddy.
Here.
Yes.
I'm here.
Is that a here? No?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Dillard?
Here.
Fahey?
Here.
Who? I saw Eric come in. I see him. Cursivan.
Present, and I'd like to compliment Mr. Cunningham on his background.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Mercurio. Nelson. Ortiz.
Here.
Parikh.
Here.
Reinders.
Here.
Reeves.
Here.
Rawani. No. Singh. Wang. Chair Greenblatt.
Here.
And Vice Chair Wells.
Here.
I think you may have missed me. Andy Smith, Walnut Creek.
Smith. Oh. And Smith, you're here. Is there anybody else that I may have missed?
Member Mercurio arrived.
Excellent, thank you.
And I'm not sure you called me, but I am here.
Eric, yes, I have you down.
Anybody else missing?
I don't think so.
I get it. All right. Let me read you some more stuff. I will request any committee questions and comments on the agenda item. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand using the raise the hand feature of Zoom. Christina or I will call upon you. Staff will unmute your mic. After you speak, staff will remute your mic and lower your hand. I will request any public comment. If anyone from the public attending the meeting wishes to speak during an agenda item, please raise your hand or press *9 on your phone. Christina or I will call upon you to speak and unmute your mic. You will have 3 minutes to speak. After 3 minutes, your mic will be automatically remuted and your hand will be lowered. If an action is required on an agenda item, I will call for the vote and Christina will conduct a roll call vote. When Christina calls upon you, staff will unmute your mic, you'll vote, and then staff will remute your mic. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Christina, have we received any public comment?
No, no public comment.
All right, so as you can see from just our roll call earlier, the committee has a large membership and we can elect to hear all of the action items, including staff presentations, public comment, and comments by the committee. And if there is no opposition on the action item, we will move to the next item on the agenda without taking a motion or vote. After all of the regular agenda items have been heard, we will combine all the action items under one motion, and then I will call on Christina to conduct one roll call vote. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the summary action minutes from May 21st, 2020. Are there any changes, comments from the committee?
Yeah, I just happened to notice that Indir Singh is listed both as present and absent. Probably just minor oversight, but
It's tricky.
yeah, especially on these things.
Do we know if the person was absent or present?
That I couldn't tell you.
Anybody in particular?
I don't believe it's Inderpreet Singh. I don't think he was there last meeting.
I am acting for Inderpreet. Gazet Zazu. I am
Right.
his alternate. Yeah.
Were
So
you?
he's not in today.
Oh, we were talking about the May meeting. Christina, maybe we can confirm later. I don't recall him being there at the May meeting, but we can confirm with him if that's needed.
Yeah,
Stephanie, I
can
remember
confirm.
his name in the minutes, so
Yeah,
he might have been there.
Okay. Are
Okay.
there any other changes or comments on the summary actions? Is there any opposition from the committee if we go forward with these minutes with staff, just doing a double check on that one member's presence or not? I think I asked that the right way. If there's no opposition, then we'll take a roll call vote at the end of the regular agenda on this item. I guess I should also ask, is there any public comment on this before we do that? Okay, a little out of order. Okay, so we're okay to move on to the next item? Okay. So the next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Are there any changes or comments from the committee? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this? Okay. If there is no opposition, we'll have a roll call vote after the regular agenda items for the consent calendar. All right, we're cruising. So the next item on the agenda is an informational item on project monitoring. Stephanie Hugh will present this item to us.
great. Thanks, Cheryl. We are on item 3-1 on the regular agenda item. So yes, this is an information item only. This is our regular monitoring reports for STIB, OBAG, ATP, HBP, and HSIP projects, and as well as the inactive project list. The STIB table is in your packet as attachment A or page 33 of the PDF, and it's been updated to reflect the 2020 STIB, which was approved at the CTC in March. Attachment B shows the OBAG 2 project lists. Page 35 of your PDF is the fiscal year 2021 OBAG projects. I've been working with all the project sponsors on this list for MTC's annual obligation plan, which is due end of the month or next week, for funding to be guaranteed. The project's program for fiscal year 2021 need to be on this plan. And there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. In order to be on the plan, the field review needs to be completed or at least scheduled. Also, the RFA or the request for authorization has been moved from November 1st to December 1st, 2020. This is due to MTC noticing there's a trend of people or project sponsor obligating their funds or meeting that November 1st deadline when they're not quite ready to move on to construction or not awarding their construction contract within 6 months of getting their E76, which then they miss the first invoicing deadline. And when this happens, these projects they land on this new list called untimely obligation, and that's been a huge concern for MTC. So to address this issue, they're moving the RFA deadline that we've been very familiar with as being November 1st to now December 1st, 2020 for this fiscal year. So the MTC is revising their obligation plan requirements, and when that's finalized, I will distribute it to all the spots and you guys at the TCC members. Also to note that federal funds still need to be obligated before January 31st, 2021, in order for the funds to be guaranteed. After that date, funds become first come, first served, pretty much open to other project sponsors who want to obligate funds for their project. As mentioned, the obligation plan for fiscal year 2021 will be due end of the week or end of the month or next week. So I'll be reaching out to just a couple more folks to make sure I have all their information. So one being Brentwood, so I need to touch base with Steve again later this week. These requirements also apply to HSIP and ATP projects, which are shown in attachment C and D. And then lastly, just wanted to highlight the inactive projects, which is different than what I was talking about with the untimely obligation, which is related to your first invoice. The attachment E is the inactive project list, which are projects that have not invoiced within 9 months. So please take a look at that list and make sure your projects are not on them. And if it on that list, and if it is, please work with your local assistant engineer to invoice your project as soon as possible to get off the list. For the obligation plan development, MTC will be checking these inactive list as well as the untimely obligation list. So please make sure you resolve any issues regarding your invoicing, especially if you have projects in the fiscal year 2021 programming year. So with that, that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. Do the committee members have any questions of Stephanie on this item? Please raise your hand. While everybody's scanning to see if there's any questions, I'll say if there's any members of the public who have a question, please raise your hand. And then I'm going to ask for a nod from a CCTA staff person that nobody has any questions about this item. Is that correct? Okay. So it's an informational item, so we get to move on to our next agenda item, which is an action item. And it's on COVID-19 impacts on Measure J revenues. And Hisham Noemi will present this. And we'll take questions after Hisham finishes his presentation.
Thanks, Leah. Hello, everybody. It's good to see you and hope you're doing well. I have a presentation for this item, hopefully to help us digest the staff report. But before I start, I want to thank the team who worked on this on our side. I know James O'Brien, Stephanie, and Jack put many hours to get input on the projects and review the products for this item. And Tim told me to basically mention that he really wanted to be at this meeting, but unfortunately he had a vacation planned from 2 years ago. With that, I can start my presentation, and I'll take the questions hopefully at the end. So back in May, I did a presentation to TCC on the impacts of COVID-19 on Measure J revenues and the actions taken by our board to prepare for it. And the presentation mentioned how we plan to develop an allocation plan to prioritize the future appropriations of Measure J funds. We have about 32 projects remaining in Measure J that we were supposed to appropriate funds for in the near future. Today, we'll talk about step one of a multi-step process to develop the allocation plan, which is to put the remaining Measure J projects in a priority order based on the principles that were approved by our board back in June. Because nobody knows at this time what are the long-term impacts of COVID-19 on our revenues, we're preparing for the worst case scenario. And the goal here is just to make sure, not just look at this year and next, but also look long-term. We want to make sure that our Measure J expenditures don't exceed our revenues when the measure expires in 2034. We also need to ensure that we continue to maintain a positive cash flow as we get there. And you probably recall seeing this chart. We compare our adopted budget to what we assumed in the 2019 strategic plan. In September 2019, we reduced the revenue forecast in anticipation of a slowdown in the economy before we even heard about COVID-19. And our overall revenues were reduced by $136 million, and 96 million out of that came actually out of the projects in the strategic plan. And as you can see in this chart, we were on course to beat our forecast. We actually beat our forecast in fiscal year 19. But we think based on the budget that was adopted, the reduced budgets that were adopted by our board for this fiscal year and fiscal year 20, we're going to be way below what we were projecting. But we don't know for that for sure. I mean, we will know our actual fiscal year 20 revenues in the next probably couple of days. But the budgeted amount are shown on this slide. You can see that in the strategic plan, we were thinking we're going to have about $92 million in fiscal year 20. After COVID-19, our board adopted a budget of $80.5 million, a significant reduction, 14%. I mean, a little bit less than 14%. And the same thing for fiscal year 21. We were assuming 92.7 million, and the budget that was adopted by our board was substantially less, 76.5 million. So just these 2 years, that's about $30 million or $28 million reduction in our revenue. Since nobody knows how bad things could get, or how quickly we're gonna recover, we ran here a couple scenarios to see the difference. A V-shaped recovery, basically, we will get back to the levels we were anticipating in the 2019 strategic plan in fiscal year 22 or 23. So, and you can see it's as part of the sharp green line, dotted line. However, if the recovery takes a long time and it's more like a wide U, like you see in the pinkish green line, dotted line, under that scenario, the recovery would take 7 years to get to the levels of revenues we were receiving before COVID-19. And this is a wide range. And, the difference between the top line, the bottom line is about, under the top line, we would lose about $30 million in Measure J, while if it's a Y-shaped recovery, a U-shaped recovery, it's more like $300 million. reduction in our revenue over the life of the measure. So it's a wide range. Nobody really knows where the actual line will fall. We're hoping it's closer to the top line. But until we develop a new revenue forecast and we have an expert do that, we just have to be cautious in the next few months about spending our revenues. We're hoping to have a revenue forecast in November of this year. With that as a background, our board adopted Resolution 2009P back in May, which suspended the new appropriations to projects, and that suspension applied to local projects programmed in the strategic plan, as well as the TLC PED-BIKE programming documents. And in total, there are 32 of these projects that are impacted, and basically they need about $43.5 million in Measure J funds to be appropriated in order for them to move forward. The resolution also directed staff to return any savings we get from the projects in the strategic plan, to put them basically in a reserve and not reprogram them to other projects. And we may have about $4 to $5 million in savings on the projects we're working on, like the Highway 4 East widening landscape, as well as the southbound 680 project, HOV project, among others. And having the reserve basically will help us cushion the impact of COVID-19 without having to take more funding from the projects. And among other things, the resolution directed staff to continue delaying the issuance of the next call for projects for the TLC and PED-BIKE programs. This is something actually that was in the 2019 strategic plan. It's not new, but they agreed that it makes sense to continue to do that. You may remember that in 2008 recession, we ended up defunding basically the TLC program in East County in order to keep EBART and Highway 4 widening projects on track because of the reduction in our revenues. We may end up needing to do this the same here in the future to ensure that the other programs in Measure J, like the return to source money or the bus operation programs, are not impacted. And finally, at the meeting, the same meeting in May, the board directed staff to work on an allocation plan to prioritize future Measure J appropriations. That's why we were talking about this item. So the board approved the principles for the allocation plan at the June meeting, and you can read them on this slide. I'm not going to go in detail. I'm not going to read them for you, but they basically favor projects that leverage at-risk state and federal funds and that are shovel-ready. So projects that are shovel-ready, ready to go to construction, and have a lot of federal and state funds that are at risk, basically will be prioritized over projects that don't have any federal or state funds at risk, or they're still in the planning or engineering stages. So when we looked at the principles, we developed this criteria to help us score the impacted project, the 32 projects. And you can see from the slide, a maximum score of 12 can be given to a project that needs the Measure J funding to match state and federal money, that has more than $10 million in state federal funds that are at risk, that can be awarded by January of 2021. And that is a part of, to a larger project that relies on it to be completed in order to continue. So these are the breakpoints that we developed to score the projects. And what ended up happening is many projects had the same scores. We had a lot of projects scored 4 points, for example, and a lot of projects scored 3 points. So to break the tie between the projects that had the same score, we used the amount of federal state funds at risk to be the tiebreaker. So a project that scored the same as another one, but have, like, let's say $10 million in state and federal funds at risk, was ranked higher than a project that had $8 million, let's say, or I'm sorry, $5 million. So that's the thought process that went into the scoring. That worked well until we basically looked at the project that didn't have any state or federal money at risk. So we had to think about another factor to break the tie. So we suggested using basically the ratio of the total project cost to the Measure J funds as a tiebreaker. So if a project does not have state and federal money, but have other fund sources like local or regional sources on it, then that scores higher than a project that is fully funded with Measure J because it's leveraging other funds. So we thought it's a good measure to break the tie for these projects. And we noticed after we mailed out the TCC packet that the attachment that we included in the staff report did not really have any basis to rank the projects that scored 4 or lower. They were in random order, actually. So before the meeting, Christina sent you an updated attachment, which took care of that based on using the criteria to break the tie between the different projects. And I have to say that 13 top projects ranking did not change, but the bottom projects, there were some changes, not a lot, but there were some. And we hopefully can get your input on this factor to see how we can tie these breaks if you don't agree with this. So as I mentioned, over the past couple months, our team here, led by James O'Brien, our consultant, James O'Brien, he basically contacted the sponsors to get the most current information about each of these projects. We asked each agency to fill basically a form to use as a basis and give us the input to score these projects. And the next 3 slides basically show you the score for each project, and it reflects the revised ranking based on the revised attachment we sent you. And if you want to know about all the details for each project, that's actually in the handout. This is just a summary form. And you will notice that the top 13 project, every project you see on this slide has some kind of federal or state funds at risk. And if you add up the amount of Measure J funds that's needed to move these projects forward, it's about $10 million. And that will leverage about $54 million in state and federal money. That's at risk. The next 2 slides show the rest of the projects. And you can see the heading for the second column from the last changed to reflect the tiebreaker criteria, the total cost to Measure J funds. So you can see that the higher the number, the higher the ranking if 2 projects are scored the same. And if you add up all the projects, they need about 40, there are 32 projects remaining. They need about $43.5 million. And they will leverage about $54 million in state and federal funds. With that, I want to talk about the next steps because probably that's the most important part. we want your input today on the ranking and the scoring of the project. If you think if you see any glaring errors in the input data, please let us know. We sure want to reflect your input on what we present to the APC in a couple of weeks on September 3rd. And the board can make a decision whether to agree with our rank list or make changes themselves. But once this list is finalized, we plan to use it along with the revenue forecast to determine how many of these projects will get their Measure J appropriation. I mentioned this is a step one of a multi-step process. The second step is to get an updated revenue forecast based on the impacts of COVID-19 from our consultants. And once we have that, we will be able to tell how far we can go down the list, if any. I mean, there could be a scenario where we just won't have enough revenues to appropriate to any of these projects. I'm hoping that's not the case. Projects that do not get their Measure J appropriation will basically have two options in front of them. The first option is to continue the project with local funds if they have it, and submit to the authority a letter of no prejudice to ensure that they remain eligible to get Measure J funds if the revenues improve in the future. And also to maintain their turn in line, basically. However, there are no guarantees. I mean, we don't know if our revenues would improve in the future, but at least the project can move forward and you don't lose your, you continue to be eligible to receive your Measure J funds if you submit your letter of no prejudice. The second option in front of the sponsors is just to delay the project until the revenues improve. Or, if we end up programming future state or federal money, like let's say there's stimulus money in the pipeline and they asked us to submit projects, then these will be our top priority to fund. We will not go out and issue calls for project until these projects are funded. Of course, there is a lot of uncertainty about this. We don't know if we're going to have stimulus funds, but it's not just restricted to stimulus. We could be programming future OBAG or future STIP funds. But there will be uncertainty about the schedule. It's not going to be immediate when we can fund these projects. Also, we have to make sure these projects are eligible for these fund sources. Some of the projects, may not want to be federalized for one reason or another. So they may not want to get stimulus funds, and that could be a factor. So we need to look at the timing and the eligibility. But the commitment from the authority is, before we issue calls for projects, is we will look at this list to try to fund first. On a parallel track to what we're doing here, we're also going to be presenting a ranked list of the CCTA managed projects to our board. And, just like what we're doing with the local projects, we're also trying to conserve our Measure J projects on Measure J funds on the projects we're managing. So we will most likely be recommending that we suspend the contracts or the projects that are relying mainly on Measure J to continue with the current phase. We're only going to do projects that leverage other fund sources or funded by other fund sources in order to conserve our Measure J funds. If we do that, we're projecting we could save another $7 million in Measure J on top of the $43.5 million that we put the brakes on the local projects. So this is really important. I mean, we need to do this because if we do nothing and we continue to appropriate without knowing whether we have the money or not, will end up impacting the programs in Measure J, like your return to source money or the bus operations or the school bus program. And that's something we don't want to do. So that's why we're developing the allocation plan. That's why we're putting everything in priority order, updating our revenue forecast. And all the input we'll get will basically help us, will be used to update the strategic plan, the 2021 strategic plan. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. This slide basically showed the timelines we're thinking about. So we're presenting the priority list to APC in September. We hopefully will get the long-term revenue forecast in November. The allocation plan will also be finalized in November. And all that input will be used to develop the 2021 strategic plan. Thank you for listening. I hope you were able to hear me. If not, I can repeat it.
I heard you very well, so hopefully others did as well. So let's start off with any questions from the committee. Are there any?
This is Abhishek here. I do have a question.
Go ahead.
So for the projects that I'm specifically talking about, a Concord project, number 20 on the list, and the East Downtown Concord PDA. So we have applied for grant through BART's Safe Route to Transit grant. And that grant allowed for up to 1.5 million. This project already has some local funding in it. Now, what happens if we were successful in that grant application, or if we are successful in getting another grant application that would fund majority of the cost of this project? Would it be reprioritized to help us with getting some additional funding over and above the local match?
Good question, Abhishek. Yes, we anticipate, I mean, if any of the sponsors are successful in receiving other funds for their projects, to let us know basically, because I think this list is going to be dynamic until we do our revenue forecast, basically until November. So if we get new information from the sponsors about other fund sources and it ends up changing their score, then we want to reflect that. But I just want to be clear that there is no guarantee, even if you're number one on this list, there is no guarantee at this time that you will be funded until we do the revenue forecast. And, you know, I don't mean to be pessimistic. Actually, I'm hoping, I think there are signs that things are not as bad as we thought, and we should know that in a couple of days. But until the revenue forecast is completed, I mean, we really don't know where to draw the line on this list. Until that happens, everybody...
It's hard to know where to draw the line, but at the same time, you know, the revenues are not going to go to zero. So, you know, the answer lies somewhere in between, and we don't know yet. Maybe it's going to take a couple of months before you guys figure that out. But just, you know, from our perspective, you know, given the circumstances, any project that we have, we would like to go ahead and try to get funding from any other source. But if we fall short, even after that funding, then, you know, that's when we would need some, you know, we'd look at Measure J to fill that gap, if that's possible.
I agree with you, Abhishek. Just let us know if you receive the funding, and we will look at the project score and, you know, update the list as more information comes in.
And just so, you know, I understand this process, essentially, this is a ranking list. Now, you guys will go ahead and do a revenue projection on how much funding will be available over the, you know, next few years. And then based on the ranking, how many of our projects get funded will get funded. Eventually, some of these projects will not get funded. And the thought process right now is that if any other additional stimulus measure comes through, or any other funding comes through, then these projects will be first prioritized before we go out and ask for other we go out and do and call for projects.
That's right.
And so the goal is essentially to fund these projects. It's just the timing is now uncertain.
Correct. And we not just we want to fund the project, we want to fund the project that have other funds at risk. We hate to lose $53 million in state and federal money. That's like half of, or 60%, 60% of what Measure J gets every year. So the goal here, to avoid loss of leveraged state and federal money, because they're going to be hard to come by in the future. But everything you said is accurate, Abhishek.
And then one of the things that was presented at Transpac was, for the STP funding, there's like 3 projects in the county, and there was some talk about maybe reprioritizing that funding into just one project. Has more thought been given to that? And is that still a consideration?
Yes, we at this time, we don't have a solid plan. We have thought about it, and there is probably an opportunity in the near future to do something with a STIP exchange. By the way, the goal of the STIP exchange is, to give us matching funds so we can apply for other fund sources. So nothing has been finalized on that, Abhishek. We're still talking about it. We'll probably present something to our board in November once the pieces fall in place. And, at this time, I don't think, we're going to be recommending taking STIP funds off any project until there is a solid plan on what to do. So at this point, there is nothing to present, but we most likely have something in November to the board.
Okay. So I'm assuming that, at some point when you guys have a better plan or more understanding of what's going on, you'll at least reach out to all the project applicants or the cities that are impacted by that project, right?
Right. We definitely will, yes.
All right, that's all I had. And thanks for the presentation, Isham.
Thank you, Abhishek.
Isham, I have a follow-up question from that. If stimulus funds come in before Measure J funds, would you fund projects based on this priority still, or how would you handle that?
Yes, this is the priority we'll go by, and if a project gets funded by other sources, it basically drops off this list. And if we have money left over, let's say nothing changed in our revenues and we're still on track, and we end up using other funds to move forward these projects, then the Measure J funds become available for future projects, basically through other calls of projects.
So a project that was, say, number 1 on this list, if tomorrow stimulus funds became available, would they automatically get those stimulus funds? Or
yeah, I anticipate the process will be, we got to talk to the project sponsor, make sure that that project can accept more federal money. There are situations where they may say, I cannot use federal money. I need matching funds. I need local funds as a match. So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. So that I think, if they can take the stimulus funds, yes, they will be the first to go out of the door. The stimulus funds, from our past experience, once they ask us for projects, they want projects that are shovel ready and ready to go. So we will be in good shape, to fund these projects with stimulus if it comes through. We don't have to look for projects. We have a list.
Yeah. What other questions do we have from the committee?
So I think it was Andy, Smith, and Ricky.
Go, Andy.
All right, thanks, Abhishek, for all your questions there, kind of clarifying some things, and definitely to Sean for the presentation. I've got a few questions. One, Hisham, I'm assuming you don't have a crystal ball out yet. Can give us like a hint, a tease as to how much of this funding, where the line will be drawn on this list. Do you have an estimate at all?
Not at all, but
Okay.
I can tell you, Andy, that for the prior fiscal year, fiscal year 20, we were assuming that our budget was 80.5 million. Let me take you to the chart. If you can see this line, we were assuming 80.5 million, and the strategic plan was 91.8 million. I can tell you we're going to be a lot closer to this number than this number.
Okay. With regard to how where in line this entire list is for Measure J funding is this basically going to work where, let's say, Measure J or CCTA revenues are at 80% of originally projected. That means that 80% of the dollar amounts of these projects, or projects representing 80% of the original budgeted amount, will be funded? Or are there other things that have to be fully funded elsewhere in CCTA first before we get to this list?
That's right. So the way it works, Andy, and thank you for the question. We need to get from HDL, the people who do our forecast, an updated forecast for the life of the measure. So right now, I think maybe we were estimating 2.5 billion in Measure J in the 2019 strategic plan over the life of the measure. Let's say they come in and say it's 2.45 billion instead of 2.5 billion. Then what I will do is take that projection by year, put it into a financial model in our strategic plan. That financial model takes into consideration how much debt service cost we have to pay on the bonds we've issued, how much, whether there are changes to it or not, how much interest we were assuming in the future. I need to adjust those in the future, as well as look at how much of the top is going to go to the different programs, the return to source money, the bus operations, and school buses and so on. What is left, and how much is going to go to program management, staff time, and consultants and so on. Once we take that into consideration, whatever left basically is going to the projects themselves. And I need to compare it to what we were assuming to the 2019 strategic plan. Let's say, it's 10% less, then I should be able to come and tell you the exact number where we can draw the line on this list. But it's not a straight, you get the revenue and you figure out how much is available to project. You gotta run the financial model, update your cash flows, take into consideration the amounts that go off the top to the different programs, to debt service on the bonds, to staff time and so on, and then figure out how much is for the project.
So then, acknowledging your prior comment about, hey, none of this is guaranteed. Do you think that there's any likelihood that a significant amount of the projects on this list will not get funded? That there's any, that that's an actual real possibility?
It is a real possibility. I know, I'm hoping we'll be able to fund some of the projects on the list. I just cannot tell you how many.
Okay.
What's the level amount. I just have to wait for the revenue forecast. And it's not going to be my decision. I mean, the revenue forecast gets adopted by our board. So they have to feel comfortable with whatever HDL is presenting for moving forward.
Okay. And then I have two, should be very short questions about the actual scoring criteria. I'm trying to wrap my head around the difference between, well, not the difference, but the relation between criteria 1 and criteria 2. And at first glance, I would think that if you've got anything under criteria 2, you would have to have something under criteria 1, but I see that there are 4 projects that don't. So there's no matching for state or fed, but then there are funds at risk. What am I missing here?
So I'll give you one of the example of one of the project, I-80 Central in Richmond. That project has a lot of other fund sources, mostly STIP funds, like 7.7 million or something like that. It doesn't have, you know, if you lose your Measure J, it's not a required match, basically. There is no match required for the STIP funds. So by not having the Measure J, you don't automatically lose the STIP funds. But another project may have OBAG money, and there is, you know, 12% match was going to be provided by Measure J funds. If the Measure J funds are not there and they're unable to fill that match, they'll end up losing their OBAG money. So I think that's the difference between the two. That's why some got a score and others didn't.
So if you have a 0 under criteria 1 where you're not doing a match, the funds that are at risk under criteria 2 or more, they're at risk because you're not going to be able to actually build the project because you're not going to have enough money, rather than you're going to lose them because you don't have the match?
That the funds that are risk, basically, maybe number 2 should have been labeled as the size of the funds that are being at risk. So the more funds at risk, the higher the points you get. A project that has $1 million at risk is not going to be scored the same as a project that has $10 million at risk. So that criteria meant to capture the size of the amount that's at risk. The first one, you know, I think the board, one of the principles they had is the Measure J a required match? If it's a required match and you don't provide the match, you end up losing the money. So that's really meant to determine whether the Measure J funds, whether the sponsor was counting on the Measure J funds to provide the match for the project.
So I think I maybe would want to comment that it appears like we're double counting a little bit between criteria 1 and 2. If, you know, if we're going to give credit for funds that are at risk, regardless of whether or not there are Measure J matching funds involved, it just seems like we're double counting there. So I just want to put that out there as a comment. And then my last question/comment is criteria number 4. Everybody scores a 0, so maybe we should just get rid of that criteria to make things simple.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let me go back to the slides. I don't know if you can see it. This is what we used as a basis. So number 1 was actually meant to address this bullet, projects where Measure J is a required match. And number 2 was meant to address the first bullet, projects that will leverage state on federal money. The last one, I agree with you. Nobody, I mean, based on the input we got from the sponsor, none of the projects were a prerequisite for a larger project. So I just didn't want to delete it because these are the principles that were adopted by our board in June. But yeah, they didn't really play any role in the scoring.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Sandy.
All right. I think Ricky had the next question.
So under this, the current list, how would CCTA view modifying project scope? Like, how does that weigh into rankings or how projects are looked at?
Can you clarify a little bit more? What do you mean by modifying projects? Like if you can cut the cost on a project to proceed without Measure J, by all means.
Well, and you know that is not the case on our end, but more specifically say, because we have like a lot of things that fall under we're a little different in the sense that we have a lot of things that fall under the umbrella of station modernization. And if we had a project that technically is under station modernization, but it is currently programmed for one project, but we wanted to change the scope, is that considered a reprogram or a scope change?
Yeah, I mean, I would, in normal situation, even without COVID-19, doing that will require a strategic plan amendment because you're changing the scope and would require the RTPC to concur. We don't want you to propose something the RTPC is not supporting. So, but I don't want to shut the door in front of you here, but if you have ideas, please talk to us. We might be able to do that anyway with, you know, we may still go through the process to get to if the new scope is better, for example. You may still want to do that, get a strategic plan amended and get the RTPC concurrence.
Did that answer your question, Ricky? Do we have any other?
And next is committee member Chen.
Hi, Sean. Thank you for the presentation. I noticed when you guys been talking about drawing a line, and to me that seemed to be at the, you know, the life of the Measure J. How much money is available for these projects? Would there be other cash flow consideration that you need to make? Meaning you have to wait for so much money to come in before you approve the first project and then the next project, or is it we don't have to worry about this cash flow issue?
That's a very good question, Jason. That's why I think when Andy asked the question, he said, once you get your revenue forecast, are you able to make the decision right away? And I told him, we need to run our financial model. One of the outcomes of the financial model is not just how much we can appropriate to projects, but also are we going to face any cash flow issues because of the decline in the revenues? And if there is a cash flow issue, I mean, the way we can deal with it, you know, is we're looking at some different ways to deal with it. One of them would be if the city or the sponsor has the money to advance the project with local funds, they can proceed, and you know, we would pay them when our cash flow issue is resolved a year or two later. So it's a good question. That's one of the outcomes we'll be looking at before we figure out where the line can be drawn, or whether we need to take other actions basically to deal with the cash flow issue.
So what I'm hearing is potentially there may be mini line drawn, meaning like the coming year you draw a line, for the following year you draw another line, and so forth.
Yeah, luckily that not all the projects are going to be delivered in the same year, at least the top ones, if I'm correct. I have to open the other attachment, but I mean, we're going to be conservative, so we don't have the cash flow issue. I mean, that's probably the short answer.
Okay. And then when your financial forecast is out, how would that information distributed to us? What's the best way for us to find out about that?
Yeah, so we will have to present it to APC. So that the APC has to approve it, as well as the board. So just check our packets maybe in the November timeframe. And when we do our strategic plan update, once the board adopts the revenue forecast, we'll start the process to update the strategic plan, and we will be, of course, going to the different RTPCs with that information.
So are you saying the first draft of the proposed plan for all those financial modeling and everything, it's going to be in October?
No. The revenue forecast will be in November. That's the plan. That's what we're pushing for. Our CFO is a little bit reluctant. I think he wants more data before he can do the forecast, but we're hoping we can have it in November at the latest. And then once we have it and it's approved by the board, it'll be used not just as a basis for this allocation plan, but also for the strategic plan update, which goes through the RTPCs. But I mean, the short answer, just look for our packets in November.
November. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Do we have any other questions from the committee?
Yes, committee member Ortiz.
Thank you, Tom, for the presentation. I had a question for you in terms of if the authority can support us at all in terms of reprogramming our federal funds. I think given that we probably won't know if there will be Measure J funds available. El Cerrito, for example, can't advance our project because we had Measure J funds for design. And then we have construction funds next year from the federal sources. So I'm wondering what the opportunity is to reprogram those federal funds until we have a better sense as to whether or not Measure J will be available both for design and construction.
Yeah, let's talk about that offline. Yvette. Stephanie and I probably need to check with the MTC if there is it OBAG money we're talking about? Okay, we'll check with the MTC to see if we can switch projects at this time. I'm assuming you have another project that could utilize OBAG and doesn't need as much Measure J. That's why you're doing this, right?
No, I mean, Measure J is, we can talk offline, but I don't necessarily have another project that can use the OBAG money. This is a really big project that needs all the funding possible. So I'll talk to you offline about it.
Okay, and we'll also look into the possibility of pushing out deadline for OBAG, the obligation deadline.
Okay.
All right, more questions? Doesn't sound like any more committee questions or comments. Do we have any public comments? Not sure who to look at to get my nod.
No, no public comments.
Okay, thank you. All right, so understanding is that Sean is looking to make sure that we're okay with the criteria, the tie-breaking methods, any other corrections to the spreadsheet itself, and if the TCC is okay in forwarding this with a recommendation to the authority. So
I'm still concerned about the double counting issue that I raised.
Okay.
And I may be, I'm not a money guy, so I mean, I may be just missing it, but I'm not a numbers guy, I should say. I'm a planner. Anyway, we can talk color and stuff like that. But anyway, I may be totally wrong, but it just seems like we're double counting here, and I don't know if I really would want to support doing that if that's the case.
All right.
I don't know if anybody else, I mean, I may be a lone voice on this, but.
Maybe I can try to answer the question again. I think one of them, Andy, gives you points if the Measure J is a required match to the grant. The other one gives you gives you points based on the size of the funds that are at risk. So you could have funds the size of the state and federal money on the project, I should say. You could have state and federal money on the project that, as I mentioned in my example, that are not at risk because you don't have the match. They might be at risk because you don't have full funding or.
Okay, so it's just if you lose the Measure J money, you simply can't afford it rather than you no longer qualify for the money.
Yeah.
Okay, I withdraw my concern.
Thank you, Andy.
All right. So is there any opposition from the committee to forward this to the authority?
Do you need a motion or anything and a roll call?
In a minute, we'll need that. Now's your time to speak up, or if there's no opposition, we'll take one motion at the end of the meeting and do a roll call at that time for everything that we're considering acting on. So I'm thinking we're okay with that, and speak now, forever hold your peace. And that means that we now need a motion, and we'll have a roll call, a vote to approve the following items. Item 1A, which was the TCC summary of actions from May 21st, 2020. And item 3.2, the COVID-19 impacts on Measure J revenues, project evaluation and ranked list. And that's to send the list to the authority board. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So that was Andy Smith. Do I have a second?
Second.
That's John Cunningham. Thank you. Christina, can you please conduct a roll call vote for us?
I sure can. Member Bobadilla,
Yes.
Member Chen,
Yes.
Member Cunningham,
Yes.
Member Conradi, I didn't hear that.
Don't see him in the meeting anymore.
Did he leave? Okay. Member Diaz? Member Diaz? No?
He's still showing as in the meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you may want to unmute them if you can.
Unmute him?
Yeah, he's shown as muted.
Yeah, I just sent a request and nothing's happening.
Maybe we'll hit him up at the end.
Okay.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so yes.
Okay, thank you.
About that.
Member Dillard?
Yes.
Member Fahey?
Yes.
Member Hugh? Eric?
Yes.
Thank you. Member Kersavan?
Yes.
Mercurio?
Yes.
Ortiz?
Yes.
Parikh? Parikh?
Yes.
Reinders?
Yes.
Reeves?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Moved it. Chair Greenblatt
Yes.
and Vice Chair Wells.
Yes.
And then Conradi. Try again. No. All right.
So it sounds like the motion passes.
Yes.
Okay. And I wanted to just reiterate, I think Sham and your team, you pulled together a lot of information in a short amount of time. And I think I can speak on behalf of the committee that we're appreciative of all that work. And I'm appreciative of everybody's patience with me as I navigate chairing these Zoom meetings. And with that, we're done a little early. So we can.
Actually, I'd like to second that, both for you and Christina. Having run a few meetings myself, public hearings myself, it is awkward at best to do this over Zoom. And
yes,
especially with, you got all these faces staring at you from your screen there. So I want to thank you both for doing such a great job getting this.
Thank you.
Smoothly.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank
Christina.
you,
Appreciate that.
All right, so we can adjourn until probably next month. Or Yvette, are you raising your hand? Oh, okay. Till next month, it's 3:42. We get to adjourn. Good to see you all.
Good to see you too. You guys be
Bye, everyone.
safe.
Thanks all.